There are currently tons of weapons inside Warzone at the moment, 93 to be exact, and in this video we're going to go through all 93 of these weapons inside Season 1 of Warzone, ranking them from best to worst. If you enjoy videos like this, weapon stat breakdowns, weapon comparisons, and overall guides for Warzone, subscribe to the channel as we're trying to reach our goal of 10,000 subscribers, and we want to reach that goal very soon. On top of that, go ahead and follow us over on Twitch as we're going to be live streaming every single week. Just to show you what we've got on screen just now, we've got the meta weapons at the top in blue, top tier weapons in green, viable weapons in orange, a slightly darker orange or would not recommend, and then don't use is in red. These are weapons that you should stay far away from. Then we've got all the weapons listed all the way down. This is including melee weapons, riot shields, all that kind of stuff, all the way down into the Cold War guns as well. Now, I'm not going to give too much of an explanation to why I'm putting each gun in different places because there's 93 weapons to go through here and I don't want to waste too much time on that. If you've got any questions about guns we like to use and what we would recommend, follow us over on Twitch. We do like to answer a lot of questions over there. So firstly, for most pistols, I'm going to put these in do not use, especially for the ones that you cannot use akimbo. The snake shot pistols, if you're using these as snake shots, they still can be useful. So I won't say don't use them, but I just wouldn't really recommend them considering there are better options out there at the moment. The 1911, don't use that. Don't use the Desert Eagle. Don't use the 725 shotgun. The AK-47 can be viable if you set it up correctly. Some people do like this gun. It's definitely not as bad as the snake shot pistol, so I'm going to need to put it a little bit higher. AMAX, we all know, is a meta gun. The AN-94, I believe, is a top tier weapon. I think this is going to be one of the most popular weapons inside Warzone because of the new damage drop-off points that we have for it. And on top of that, it's a very accurate gun. Next, we have the AS-Val. Now, I think the AS-Val is a top tier gun, especially for solos and duos, just because of that 30 round mag. And even depending on what gun you pair it with, it can be useful inside quads as well as trios as well. The AUG is definitely a viable gun with a 5.56 conversion ammo. The AX-50 is still a viable sniper rifle. It's a great gun, but it's just not the best sniper rifle in the game. Bison, I wouldn't recommend unless you're using it as ground loot. The Bruin is definitely still a meta weapon in my opinion. I still think this is a great LMG and everyone should be using it. The knife, I wouldn't really recommend using unless you just need it for the mobility and you're using it to fill your second weapon slot. Crossbow, would not recommend either. Dragunov, definitely don't recommend this gun. Kodachis, again, don't recommend that. EBR, I wouldn't really recommend it. There's better marksman rifles in the game now. The FAL is a great option actually for a weapon. It's still a top tier gun. It's not a meta gun by any means because it's not overpowered. The FAMAS I would not use at all. There's better burst weapons in the game now. The Fennec is definitely a viable SMG just because the ammo and the magazine is quite small. It's not going to be as top tier as some of the other weapons, but its time to kill is definitely up there with some of the best weapons in the game, such as the MP5, the Cold War MP5, and even the MAC-10. This kills just as fast. The Finn LMG, a lot of people have asked us about this gun over on TikTok, and it is a viable gun, definitely not one of the best LMGs in the game. Grau is a top tier gun. I don't think it's still the meta weapon, but definitely a very viable weapon in the game. HDR is no longer the meta sniper rifle in my opinion, but is still a top tier sniper. Holger, viable. ISO, I wouldn't really recommend it. The Fennec's definitely a better option if you're looking for an SMG like that. The Jak-12, definitely a viable shotgun. The Joker can be useful in some cases, to be honest, if you're trying to clear people off the top of buildings. But other than that, it's not really going to be an extremely useful secondary weapon. Kali sticks, again, I wouldn't really recommend using it unless you're using it for fun. The R98, an amazing sniper rifle, my favorite sniper rifle in the entire game still. The Kilo, I think this is still a really meta weapon in the game. Even though it does have that damage drop-off point, I do think the Kilo is one of the better guns. Actually, I'm going to move the Grau back up to meta because I think both of these guns are very viable inside Warzone. The Grau actually has less damage drop-off points than the Kilo, and that's why I do believe it's a bit more viable. The M13, unfortunately, I'm going to have to put it into viable. It could be a top tier gun, but the damage profile is just not good enough unless you're hitting a lot of headshots compared to some of the other weapons in the game. The M9 pistol, I think this is what this is called, not that viable, especially inside Warzone. I wouldn't recommend using it. The M4 is definitely a top tier weapon. It always has been and it always will be. The M91 Lmg, definitely a viable gun. Not one of the best LMGs in the game, but it's viable for sure. Then we have the MG33 or MG43 or something like that. I don't know what this is called. But again, it is viable, just not one of the better guns in the game. But I wouldn't recommend this over some of the other LMGs. Mark II Carbine, would not use this if my life depended on it. I would love this gun to be good. I've been saying this for such a long time now. But it's just a hit marker machine. Would not recommend using it. The Model 680 Shotgun, again, I don't think this is that good. I just wouldn't recommend it. It's decent for ground loot, I suppose, when you're picking it up, but other than that, I wouldn't recommend it in a loadout. Modern Warfare MP5, one of the best guns that has been in the game since launch. It is a meta weapon still. The MP7, still a top tier gun. It's probably not as good as some of the Cold War SMGs now. We then have the Odin. A lot of people do like using this gun, and I do believe it to be viable. Just because of the size of the magazine and how slow it shoots, it's definitely not a top tier gun, but it's definitely viable. A lot of people can use this gun and do well with it. The Origin 12 shotgun, still definitely a viable shotgun. The P90 is a viable SMG as well. It's not one of the better SMGs in the game, definitely viable though. The Pila would not recommend, or would not use it at all, to be honest. The PKM is definitely a top tier weapon. It's definitely one of the best LMGs in the game. Actually, I'm going to put it into meta because I think it is a meta gun. A lot of people are still looking over the PKM, and I think it's a great gun inside Warzone. The R90 Shotgun, still a viable shotgun. The Ram 7, still a top tier assault rifle. The Akimbo R90 pistols, again, I would not recommend these over the Diamati pistols. The Riot Shield, again, I wouldn't recommend using it. Some people do like using it as a secondary to certain weapons, and if you're playing Juggernaut Royale, it can be very useful. RPG, I wouldn't really recommend it, but you can put it in your loadout if you want to. The Rytec, I wouldn't use at all. The M80 Sniper rifle from Cold War is actually a better version of this gun, so I would recommend using that instead. We've got the SA87. I actually really like this gun. This is one of my favorite guns to use inside Warzone. I've used it for a lot of different gameplay videos, and it actually does perform really well in terms of damage profile. So I'm going to put it in viable. It's still a viable LMG. It's just that it has a lot of recoil. The Scar, again, viable assault rifle, is not going to be top tier. It's not going to be meta, but you could definitely use it inside Warzone if you kit it out correctly. SKS, I wouldn't recommend it over some of the other marksman rifles in the game, and we'll get onto that. The SPR, definitely a top tier sniper rifle. A lot of people do like using it. I don't think it's as good as the Kar98. The Kar98 just does have a slightly faster aim down sight time, which I believe to be really important. We then have the Strela. Again, I wouldn't really recommend using this. The Striker, I would not use this at all. The Uzi, I wouldn't recommend. The VLK Rogue is actually a viable shotgun inside Warzone. A lot of people are looking over this shotgun. It's actually a pretty good gun. The Starting Pistol, definitely don't use that. The 1911 from Cold War, definitely don't use that. The AK-47 from Cold War, definitely a viable gun. The AK-74U is a weird SMG that I do like using. It has an easy to control recoil pattern, but it just doesn't have the time to kill as some of the other SMGs in the game. Actually, I'll just put it inside viable for now. We then have the AUG. I think this is a top tier weapon, especially for close to medium range, and just slightly further than medium range as well. This gun's extremely useful, especially if you're landing headshots. The Bullfrog, again, a top tier SMG, can be very useful. Definitely not as good as some of the other SMGs, but it's definitely just as good as the MP7 in my opinion. Honestly, I don't even know what this launcher is from Cold War, and I just wouldn't recommend using it. The Diamati Pistol now this is definitely still top tier. If you're using this akimbo, it's still extremely viable. They're very viable at close range. They're better than most shotguns in the game still. I mean, their hipfire spread has been increased and their damage has been reduced slightly, but these guns still shred through enemies so easily. Of course, you don't have those ADS capabilities, but like I said, still extremely viable guns. Very top tier. Then we have the DMR-14. Again, this is still a top tier gun. The FFAR-1, this is a meta weapon for sure, especially at close range. This fries quicker than most of the other guns in the game. The Gallo shotgun, I think, is definitely very viable. It's not as good as some of the SMGs in the game, in my opinion, but it's probably the best shotgun in the game. So I would recommend the Gallo shotgun if you're looking for one. We then have the Groza. I think the Groza is top tier. It's not as good as the FFAR-1 in my opinion. It's definitely a very top tier assault rifle, but it's not got that long range capabilities what you're looking for in assault rifles, and that's why it's not up there with the AMAX, the Kilo, and the Grau. We've then got the R90 Shotgun. Again, I wouldn't really recommend this one. It is kind of viable as ground loot, but over the Gallo, it's definitely not better than the Gallo for sure. We then have another knife, and like I said, that's just going to go down at the bottom with don't use. We then have the Krag 6. This is definitely a viable gun, and once to give it a slight buff, it could be more than viable, but I think it's only a viable gun for now. I don't think it's a top tier weapon by any means. We then have the KSP or the KPS or whatever it's called. Again, I would not recommend using this. This is a burst fire SMG. You want a full auto SMG for sure. The M16 is a top tier gun as well, similar to the AUG. It's definitely a top tier gun within that medium to medium longish range, and that's where you should be using these weapons. The M60 Lmg has a lot of horizontal recoil, and that's why I wouldn't really recommend it over some of the other guns in the game, like the PKM, for example. The PKM does have a lot of vertical recoil, but that's easy to manage. The Noob Tube, I would not use this weapon at all. It's just don't use. Again, it's one of those weird weapons. Then we've got the M80 Sniper rifle, and again, this is more viable than the Rytec in my opinion. So if you do like semi-automatic sniper rifles, the M80 is definitely the best out of the bunch. Then we've got the Mac-10. Of course, we all know this is a meta gun. There's not really much that needs to be said about that. The Magnum, you should not use. The Milano, oh my god, this gun is terrible. I would not recommend it. It is useful as a ground loot sometimes. I wouldn't use this gun, to be honest. It just doesn't do any damage whatsoever. Next, we have the Cold War MP5. This is definitely a meta weapon as well. It has a really low time to kill. The recoil is a bit high on this gun, but it's still very useful inside Warzone, especially at those closer ranges. Pellington, definitely viable, not the best sniper rifle in the game. We then have the Type 63, again, a viable gun, just doesn't do enough damage in my opinion, and it doesn't have that good bullet velocity like the Modern Warfare guns do. RPD, again, is viable. Ground loot is actually amazing with this gun, but again, is not as good as some of the other LMGs in the game. We then have the Cold War RPG, again, that's down at the bottom. The Hammer, down at the bottom. The Stoner is definitely the top tier LMG from the Cold War weapons, and that is the one I would recommend. Street Sweeper is top tier for sure. Next, we have the Tundra. This is definitely the meta sniper rifle at the moment. If you're looking for that maximum bullet velocity, that is definitely the gun you should be using right now. It's got faster bullet velocity than the HDR. It's just that the aim down sight time does let it down a little bit, but if you kit it correctly with that Royal Cross scope, you can still get a decent aim down sight time with this gun. So like I said, I highly recommend it, but hopefully they fix all the attachments and it'll be even better inside the meta of Warzone. Moving on to Type 63, definitely a top tier marksman rifle again. It's very similar to the DMR. Again, another top tier gun. We've then got the XM4. This is just a viable assault rifle. It's not the best, and the attachments barely do anything for this gun. So like I said, unless they fix all the attachments to make it do better things, then it will bump up to top tier. But other than that, currently it's just viable. And then lastly, we have more swords again in the game, and that is going to be at do not use. So there we have the tier list, and this is all of the weapons ranked from best to worst inside Warzone. Of course, you've got your meta weapons at the top tier weapons in green as well, and these are probably the two categories I'd highly recommend using the most. You can go into the viable options as well if you really wanted to. Some are stronger than others inside viable, like the Gallo Shotgun, the Fennec, the AX50 Sniper Rifle. Some of the shotguns in there as well are quite good. But like I said, if you're looking for a top tier loadout inside Warzone, you should be pairing some of the meta weapons with some of the top tier weapons inside Warzone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave us a like, as it helps us get recommended more in the algorithm. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, as we're trying to reach our goal of that 10,000 subscribers, and we're very, very close. On top of that, follow us over on Twitch as well, as we want to get most of you guys moving over to there so we can actually make more live content for you. And lastly, thank you very much for watching.